I thought that I knew myself. I thought that I had a pretty good handle on all the things about myself. And then I experienced a close, intimate partnership that mirrored back so many things that I had no idea about. No idea, and it's just the opportunity for learning about yourself that comes from like that trust in that relationship. It's just like, it is a next level.
Welcome to International Love Story, the podcast about intercultural relationships. My name is Christina, and in today's podcast episode, I would like to welcome Casey. Casey is an author, so there's a lot we're going to talk about. There are a few interesting topics we're going to cover today. So thank you so much, Casey, for being here today, and let's dive right into it.
Absolutely. I love it. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat with you today.
You are an author, Casey. You're living in Turkey at the moment. Love brought you there, more or less.
Yes, this time it did.
You've seen, you've lived in different places as well in the past 2 years. You're originally from the US.
Well, those are some very important details there. Yeah, for sure. Probably the most recent things I would use to define myself, for sure. So yeah, I'm from the States, and I spent my 20s living and working abroad. I went to Ireland first for a year, then Germany, South Korea. Turkey was, supposed to just be another stop, another experience, another job that I worked at for a year, but ended up staying for 3 years at the job and also meeting my husband during that time. So that was a whole different part of the journey. Then he and I moved to the States together, went through the whole fiance visa to citizenship journey for him. And then about a little over 2 years ago, we decided to move back to Turkey for a bit. So that is where we are now. And I am spending my time, or at least part of my time now, writing. The first book I wrote was like a self-help book for people in intercultural relationships. And then at some point I decided to start writing fiction. So now I write romantic comedies, and that is how I spend a decent chunk of my time.
What I do think is interesting, and we're definitely going to talk about that later on in the conversation as well, is what actually brought you to, first writing a guideline for intercultural couples, and then from there on writing, I think 7 or 8 books in total. How many did you write already?
There's some in fiction, and then 2 or 1.5 really of the self-help nonfiction. Yeah, that was a leap to go from that first book and then be like, I'm going to write a novel. That was not something I ever envisioned myself doing, and yet I've done it a few times now. So apparently, I don't know. The first book, Loving Across Borders, I wrote because at that time I was doing relationship coaching, and I had a podcast of my own, which, doesn't exist anymore. Everything that I was creating at that time was all just because I was like, these resources don't exist. I can't find them. The things that I was looking for, books that I was looking for, they weren't coming up on Amazon, when I was searching for is there, a relationship workbook specifically for couples like us? And it's like, no, of course there isn't, because I would stumble onto here's a guidebook you should read before you get married. And it would just be so, it wouldn't remotely apply to the situation my husband and I were finding ourselves in, because it was there was a question. This is one that sticks in my mind even from years later, because it's just so absurd. It was in order to understand how you and your spouse are going to resolve conflict, imagine if one of your parents were married to one of his parents. What would that look like? That is a useless question for me, because they couldn't communicate. Not even one single word. Their cultures are completely different. There's just no overlap. So no, I can't tell you how my mom and his dad would. There's just no scenario where they would be together. So, long story short, I was like, okay, I'm going to work on writing this book, because I've noticed some things from my own experience and from the people that I had been working with at that point. And that turned into a book, which was very exciting to put it out into the world. It was right before COVID. So I was like, I'm launching this book. It's so exciting. It was February 2020, and then everything changed and life just got really different for all of us, And that time took me through there. When I look back at it now, I can find like the different points where I'm like, oh, so that's how I ended up becoming a fiction writer. Just like little pivots here and there where I was like, I think I'm not going to do the relationship work so much. I think I'm going to do some other stuff. And I picked up a book at a bookstore that was a retelling of Pride and Prejudice centered around an Indian family, and the Indian culture was so predominant. And I was like, this is so cool. Just little steps along the way. I read Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way, and that took me on a journey. And I think that's probably why at some point I was like, okay, I'm going to sit down and try and finish that novel that I started to draft last year during, National Novel Writing Month. And then it just grew and grew from there, and fully stepped away from any sort of coaching work. And I think even any sharing about my relationship on Instagram or anything like that, just because I was like, fiction is fun. And in some ways it can be more honest than nonfiction or a glimpse of your own life, because I didn't want to look at my own life for content. I didn't want to look at my own relationship and be like, oh, this would be a great thing to share on my Instagram stories. I'm like, no, this is important. This is private. This is just for us. So, it's just open up the document and just like let something flow through and see what comes out. And I discovered a love for writing fiction.
You were telling me also a couple of days ago when we had our break call that you get a lot of inspiration as well from the outside. Like it's basically surrounding you. And there was one specific sentence that caught my attention, is that airports are a portal. That was the thing. I was like, she is so right, because we were talking about like how critical airports are because they're bringing people together. So especially during COVID, with being separated from family members, from friends, while living abroad, and then you are finally able to cross countries again and to see each other again and to hug each other, how excited they are to see each other. And he was waiting for his wife, like with a flower. It's so sweet, super excited with a big smile in his face. Or when a grandma finally sees her grandkids again after a long period of time, for example, how they're running with their short little cute legs direction their family members abroad, and all of that. So there are a lot of like emotional, magical things going on, and you get a lot of inspiration from what's surrounding you as well, right?
Definitely. I mean, that's like, well, okay, that's like definitely one thing. I know a lot of people criticize Love Actually, the movie, and like it hasn't really stood up to the test of time. Yeah. But that's the part they definitely got right. And like the arrivals gate at the airport and just like those reunions. I'm like, yeah, you can't deny it. Like that's a beautiful thing. And I find so much inspiration at an airport. I'm like, just one flight back to the US, and I'm like, all right, I'm set. I've got material to work with, just because of that very thing that you're talking about. And we romanticize travel, so you can easily just imagine like there's so much possibility there. Like even when you're like, okay, my gate is here and it's flying to Istanbul. But if I wanted to, I could just walk over to that counter over there and be like, hey, can I get on this flight instead? I mean, I know it doesn't work that way. You can't just be like, hey, I'm going to go. Wait, you have the potential. Like if you go through this door, you're going to go to this continent. If you go through this door, you're going to go to this continent. There's so many people connecting from such widely geographically separated locations. I don't know. It's so easy. Like our little worlds can be so small, but when you go to an airport, you're like, no, the world is big, and people have loved ones who are arriving from literally every corner of the globe, and it's a beautiful thing. So I had an inspiration moment at the airport when I was flying back to the States, where they made an announcement of like, we need volunteers to take the next flight tomorrow because the flight is overbooked. And I was like, I'm not going to take that offer, but I am going to pull out my phone and jot down some notes here because I just had an idea for a book. And that's the book that I most recently published, my Christmas book, 2023. So it's like, that's such a perfect meet cute, for two strangers. You just don't know. I mean, like, yeah, air travel generally isn't really glamorous anymore, and you don't usually end up falling in love with your seatmate on the flight. But the potential is there, especially in
a friend of mine did a couple of years ago, and Then
I love that.
filed in a while. Yeah. But then went on a flight from Germany to London, actually.
So sweet, so sweet.
To her. So it happens, definitely.
It does. It does.
Not all fiction.
Yeah. Well, fiction is based on, like reality or like a dream that we hope is reality. So for someone who's listening, who's like, I would love to meet someone on an airplane, they hear your friend's story and they're like, so it is possible, That's great.
And another thing, because you've been telling me, that you've been back and forth between the US and Turkey. And I know that first time you moved to Turkey was 10.5 years ago, right?
And it was you're right, exactly 10.5 years ago.
10.5 years ago, and then you moved to the US with your husband. You lived in the US for a couple of years. What brought you back to Turkey, may I ask?
Yeah, it was, we were there for 5 years. And it just started to feel like it was time, I guess. We both loved being near my family. That was great. That was wonderful. I certainly loved getting to hang out with my parents regularly and getting to be around my nieces and nephews. Like, that's so important. But we have family here too, and especially with COVID, we hadn't been back in a while. So that's the challenge. That's the beauty of a relationship like mine or like yours, is that like there are people who love us and that they are very far apart, and we're not going to pick up my parents and move them to Turkey, just like we're not going to pick up my husband's whole family and move them to my parents' small town in Michigan, So the need there for being flexible, for being like, well, we can be here. We were able to be there at that time, and now we're able to be here now, and kind of holding on to that flexibility of like, okay, if there's a need at some point, family-based need, or, based on so many factors, based on like the political situation in either of our countries, like we want to be able to be flexible and be where it makes the most sense for us to be, or where we are the most needed. But that, like, when I look ahead to our future, I like to do visualization, and I'm very like mindset and personal development, all this stuff. But if I try to visualize like my dream home and where I'm going to be living, I'm like, I don't know. I cannot. It's not clear, because it's not clear to me. Like, there's two different realities, and I'm holding on to them both. Like, a light. I'm not holding on to super firmly. Like, we're definitely going to be in Michigan. I'm like, well, I can tell you in January, Michigan's not super appealing. Holding on to those two realities, letting like, who knows where we're going to live in 10 years or 20 years, and maybe they'll be the same place, or maybe they won't. Maybe we're going to be continuing to bounce back and forth, and just staying open to that possibility is, if we're going to move, we can't take it super lightly, because we do have 4 cats. So that's a challenge to figure out, but it's future Casey's challenge. Today, Casey does not need to do any Googling about how to fly transatlantic with 4 cats. Today's Casey can just go play with those cats and then go to bed. That's great.
Actually, your husband has the same mindset. So regarding to that, you're both quite easygoing, and you take it one day after the other and see where it's going to draw you and which direction it's going to draw you.
Yeah, and kind of always keep that open for discussion between the two of us. Like, if we ever start feeling like, okay, we're pretty settled in this location, we have to talk about that, because one of us can't just decide, like, hey, I think I want to live here forever. Like, we have to talk about that with each other and feel like what makes sense. And yeah, it's interesting, because we are definitely on the same page right now, where we're both like, yeah, I don't know what the future holds, So, which is, I think that's preferable to one of us, really having a fixed idea of it and trying to campaign and convince the other one that like, this is the right way. And like, trusting that we'll get the nudge at the same time, that like, okay, it's time to move, or it's time to commit to being here more.
And how do you feel right now? It sounds like you're feeling very comfortable. Did you learn the language? How did you adjust in general? It's not the first time you're living there.
This move back, I did not expect it to be as difficult as it was, because I had lived here before. But I didn't really realize until we moved back that like, this is the first time that I moved to a new country and I didn't do it for a job. Every other time I had moved abroad, there was a job lined up, and it was like, this is my purpose. And then we moved here, it was like, double-edged, because one side of it was like, this is the first time I've moved with someone, and this is my person, this is my partner, this is a great source of comfort. But the other side of that was, I moved because of him, like we're just here because your family is here, our family is here. So I didn't realize how difficult that would be, because I had a job, but it was online and it wasn't something that required me to be here. So there was some identity confusion with that for sure, because, it's like, who am I? What am I doing? All these questions that like to come up. But, we did a season of living quite close to my husband's family. And then we ended up moving to the coast, because we both were just like, really like our space. And I like being near the water, and like it just is what felt right to us. We looked for where we could find a place to rent, because boundaries are a really big, important thing for us that we've both learned about with our own respective families of origin. So wow, we're like the champions of boundaries. Anyone comes to us with an interpersonal problem of any kind, we're like, it's boundaries. This is about boundaries. Like, you just set some boundaries with this person or this person. Like, everything's about boundaries. Not really true, but like, interpersonally, it kind of is. So, we're very like in our own little space, and that works for us. It's pretty great. Like, you asked about language. It's a struggle, to be honest. Like, I have learned a decent amount. I understand a decent amount. But as a former language teacher, I am such a hypocrite, because I would tell my students day in and day out, Joanna, just speak. It's okay to make mistakes. Just but to myself.
But like, as I say, not as I do.
Exactly. It's like, you go ahead and make a mistake. No one's going to judge you. I'm certainly not going to judge you. But if I make a mistake, it is the end of the world. So that's an issue that I am very aware of for myself. But yeah, that's not a daily challenge, because it's so often just like the two of us or the six of us, since we have so many animals living in our house. Like, I feel the lack of community at times, especially because we're living in a town that's very much like summer town. Like, people have their summer homes here, and we're living here year round. So in the winter, we love it because it's a ghost town, but also it's a ghost town. So it's not like community like I remember having as a kid or even as a college student, and that might just be a challenge of growing up, getting older too, is that like, making friends as an adult is a hard thing. I think that's a fairly universal experience, that like, you're in your 30s, you're like, apart from work, how do you make friends, So it's good to be here. This season of our lives, it makes a lot of sense to be here, just in terms of the space it's created for me to write. Like, if we were still living back in the States, I'd have to work a lot more, probably, just because of the economy, how things work, how money works, But here I'm able to work a little less and then take that time to, write books. That's why there are 7 novels out there, or 6 novels and 1 novella, but because there's space for them to come to life. So I'm grateful for this season for that, for sure.
And it also really seems like you are getting lost in your own books as well somehow. Obviously, I'm not a writer, but how does it work though? Like, you do have a vision in your head, you do have a topic, you do have a storyline, but how do you bring a story to an end as well? Because you are the one who's closing this chapter, you are the one who is giving a book closure. Isn't that right? Somehow for me? It's so I never want it to end.
Yeah, no, it's definitely tempting. I think, well, one thing that helps for sure is like just consuming a lot of stories in the form of books and movies and whatever way they come to you, because you start to learn story structure from that. And there's some great books about story structure. And once you learn about story structure, as someone who has struggled with anxiety and like, especially with fiction, like watching a movie and I get so anxious, it's like, the more I learn about story structure, the more I'm like, oh, I can chill out because I know what's going to happen. Like, oh, this is this part of the story. This is the dark night of the soul. This is where it feels like all hope is lost. But just wait, just keep going. Now we're going to see how this is going to turn around. It had to be that way in order for this to make sense. So it's such a cool thing to learn about that. But then also like my experience of writing, it's almost like meditation. It's almost like a spiritual experience I find when I'm writing. And especially like when we first moved back here, we lived in this like a basically a farmhouse, like one room farmhouse. And we were there in the winter and there wasn't a whole lot to do besides just sit near the wood stove. And I wrote 2 books in that, 2 first drafts in that place. And I was very good at that time about being disciplined and writing every night. And a couple things that were interesting. One was some nights I felt inspired, some nights I didn't, but I still wrote every night. And I often felt when I was writing, especially when I wasn't feeling inspired, like this is just crap. Couldn't tell the difference between the days where I was inspired and the days where I wasn't inspired. There was never an obvious break in the text as I was reading it where I'm like, oh, who wrote this part? It still all connected. And so that made me think that that it's not about inspiration, because like waiting for inspiration can mean just waiting until you die, because it might not come in the way that it feels like it's supposed to come. And also often when I'm writing, things happen and I'm like, I did not know that was going to happen. Like I do have an outline, like especially for a full-length novel, I generally have like a phrase for each chapter, a sentence. So like, I know this is going to happen in this chapter, but I'll be writing and I'm like, well, where did you come from? This character that just popped up in this scene. Oh, I guess you needed to be in this scene. Okay, well, let's see what's going to happen, So it feels sometimes like I'm not really writing it by myself. Like the characters are helping, and sometimes not helping. Sometimes they're making it worse for me and harder for me. So like, why can't you just do what I want you to do? And they're like, because I'm flawed, remember?
Do you know the end already when you start writing? Is that also something that's changing along the line, along?
So the thing, like specifically, I know there's going to be a happy ending. Like that's a requirement. That's a deal that when you write a romance novel, the agreement between the author and the reader is like, it has to be a happy ending. If there isn't a happy ending, you're breaking trust with them. And as an anxious person myself, I'm like, I can relax if I know this is going to end well. But no, I don't necessarily know in what way it's going to end well. And sometimes it gets there. And it feels like, these little inside jokes that I have with myself are coming out on the page. And I'm like, no one but me is going to know why this is an Easter egg. I'm like, I'm not Taylor Swift dropping Easter eggs that like millions of people are going to be like, oh, this means this and that means that. But I'm dropping my little Easter eggs that at least amuse me, So, and as you're writing, sometimes you realize like this character is going to need their own book, this side character here. Oh, there's something compelling going on there. So we're going to have to write a book for her next. So it just takes on a mind of its own, like anything creative, I think. And I feel very passionate about that. Like for anyone who is listening who's like, oh, I wish I was a creative person, but I'm just not. I'm like, everyone is creative. And I feel like so many of us got discouraged from that as kids, like either in art class or in English class, writing class. We kind of started to get labeled as like, these are the artistic kids, these are the theater kids, these are the kids who are good at these specific things. And like, I think we're all inherently creative beings, and there's so much joy in doing something creative. So I just say it's a little bit of encouragement. Like everyone's allowed to write a story. Nobody needs to be like special in order to write a story. Everyone's allowed to paint a picture. Everyone's allowed to, like, whatever you want to do, you are allowed to do it.
But what I find very interesting as well is, I don't know if you realize, or I'm sure you do, but it sounds a little bit like your life as well. And there's going with the flow, not knowing what's going to happen next, which character will appear next, and basically change the storyline completely. And I think it's very interesting that you don't have like, okay, this is going to be chapter 1, 2, 3, this is going to happen here. And I mean, that you basically go with whatever crosses your mind in that very moment, and that you find the encouragement also to write it down and being clear
and trust that it's going to work out.
Yeah. And eventually you'll find your happy ending in the end.
Yeah. I love that, looking at it that way, because that is interesting. I mean, a lot of writers say that it helps them to write faster and better if they know what's going to happen. And I haven't really gotten into that a lot, just because I do find like it makes so much more sense to me to like just go explore and see what comes out. Now I like to challenge myself with things I'm not good at, so I'm like, I probably should learn how to outline better. But there are so many metaphors in like fiction for life, because that metaphor there is the trusting that it's going to work out. And I similarly, like when you're reading a book, especially if you know, I mean, a lot of literary fiction, like, you know, it's going to rip your heart out and make you cry. You, as a human, you feel these emotions and you're like, I'm so anxious for these characters. Like, it looks like everything's going to fall apart. And it's like, your anxiety isn't helping anything. The story is already written. It's all on page already. Like, as much as you stress about it and as much as you sacrifice your sleep because you just have to know what's going to happen, like, it won't change anything. You can put the book down. You can go to bed. I just find that, like, the metaphors there, because I'm like, doesn't that apply in some way to life? Like, is it going to change it?
Why did you choose to write novels?
I think, well, it was similar with like the self-help book initially, in that, like, okay, I don't see a lot of books like this. And then realizing that there wasn't a lot of fiction. So the first book I wrote was a Pride and Prejudice retelling, which is a little ambitious for a first novel. Looking back on that now, I'm like, probably wouldn't go right to a retelling of a beloved classic, but that's okay. That's what I did with The Turkish Hero, because I was like, I don't see a lot of intercultural couples, and I don't see a lot of books set in Turkey. I don't see a lot of Turkish heroes, all these things. Like, I think that breadcrumb of that was even years and years prior. Like, there was a summer when my husband went to Turkey for a couple of weeks and I didn't go with him. And I was really sick when he left, and just a really bad headache. And so I was super emotional that he was leaving. And I was just like, then I started to feel better. And I was like, I'm going to watch every movie I can find that's set in Turkey. And I'm like, well, I know, but I can't find any on Netflix. So then I was like, well, I'll watch things that are like set in Greece. I don't know, just to be like in this somewhat similar part of the world. And I just didn't love the depictions that I was finding, you know, like things didn't feel true to my experience. Not to say they're not true to someone else's experience, but they just, I don't know, too much of a caricature, stereotype, you know, or the people from that country are more like background players, scenery. They're not really people. So that started there, where I was like, well, I'd like to write a book that it's not my experience, but it's true. It's similar to what I know, because I know what it's like to Turkey and to be a little like a fish out of water, you know, like you're out of your element. Like, I don't know what I'm doing here. And then you meet someone. Then it just went from there. And I was like, that's the uniting theme of all the books, is like they're either multicultural couples and or falling in love internationally, because sometimes they might be two Americans and they fall in love in another country. But my little tagline is about, the books are all about catching flights and feelings, because you don't have to choose, you know?
I would have difficulties to bring the story to an end, because I wouldn't like for it to end.
But then there's another one, you know, and that's like, yeah, you hang out with those characters for a long time and you really, you know, you get to know them and you like them. But then probably there's other characters in that story who you're like, oh, now I want to write about them, you know, or something totally different.
When I write, obviously, that's
one. Exactly, yeah.
So you definitely have built your life in the past few years, and you've seen the world in the past few years. So I'm sure it has been a roller coaster ride as well for you. I mean, yes, for everyone, obviously. But if you think that the past 10.5 years, so since you moved to Turkey the first time, what were your biggest learnings in general? And was there anything or any situation you faced where you thought to yourself, I'll never be able to handle that, I'll never be able to go through that, but obviously you've managed?
Oh, wow.
I know that's
such a good question.
Deep question.
I hope no, but it's so good. A couple of things came to mind. I mean, immediately, the first thing is like the biggest learning and the biggest growth, and this is like perfect for the theme of your podcast, but 100% is being in a relationship with my husband and all of the growth that brought up, because that was a completely new experience for me. I had been single, like I just was a lifetime of being single, based from my own reasons, my own healing that I was doing from, you know, losses and grief and stuff at a younger age. I thought that I knew myself. I thought that I had a pretty good handle on all the things about myself. And then I experienced a close, intimate partnership that mirrored back so many things that I had no idea about. No idea, you know, and it's just like the opportunity for learning about yourself that comes from like that trust in that relationship, it's just like, it is a next level. So I don't know if I could even like distill that down to one particular thing, but it's revealed me to me in ways that I don't know that I could have known myself. So interesting, such an interesting thing. And then, I mean, the hard things mostly, I would say, has been grief of losing like grandparents, that which also then tied into that relationship as well. Like particularly losing my grandfather when I was in Turkey still. That was pretty early on into our relationship, but a very, very hard loss because someone who I had always admired. But I survived it. And that loss also was eye-opening to me and made me realize prior to that, I was planning to leave Turkey at the end of the year, go on my next adventure. And yet I was in this relationship with my now husband. And I was like, this is like, I have a family here. Like these are not, I mean, him especially, but also just like the environment that I was in, friends that I had, it put things in perspective in a way. And especially him as a partner. And it's like, this just feels like it would be the wrong choice to throw this away because I'm pursuing adventure, because isn't this an adventure too, And I mean, gosh, isn't that what life does? The things that you think you can't handle, then you do handle them, because what's the alternative? Just keep moving forward and learning to trust more in yourself and your inner resources, and the people around you who are also resources. But yeah, I don't know. I'm so grateful. Like look back at like that me from 10.5 years ago, and like is a whole different person. But I have so much love for her, and compassion for her and gratitude, because she brought me to where I am now as a more older and hopefully wiser version of myself. I just love getting older and like settling more and more into my personality and caring less and less about what other people think.
Oh yeah, that's a good benefit. I'm still working on that though.
Me too, 100%. But think back to yourself as like a 16-year-old and like, don't you care way less now than you did when you were 16? It was
I don't want to.
What are you doing that? Oh my God, that was like hell. That was hell.
So much for sharing this part of your life as well. I'm sorry for your loss, first of all, but you are 100% right that you face a situation like yours. In that very moment, you might not think that you'll somehow overcome it, but you also know that you have to keep on moving. I mean, what other ways there, right? So that you have a lot of love for your younger self, because she brought you where you are nowadays. I think I've been talking about that because before we started recording, I had another recording. Interestingly, this was part of the topic as well, like looking back to your younger self. And I do that as well. Like, it's not like, okay, I'm setting a time in the year where I sit down and I'm reflecting myself. It's more like in stressful situations or in situations where I think I might be stuck at the moment. This is when I like to reflect and see back and see where my younger self brought me. And I do love that a lot. I don't have negative feelings for that either, thinking back and you're like, yeah, I like where I am nowadays.
Thanks for that, past me. Yeah.
Exactly. So I'd be interested in, Kenzie, I mean, you've sharing a little bit of your work, a little bit of your past as well, of your journey. And you've shared that at the moment, if you don't really know where your future is going to lead you, but let's say you could write your future yourself. Let's say Casey is sitting down and she's writing the next 2 or 3 chapters of her life, the next 2 or 3 years of her life. What would she write down?
Oh, 2 or 3 years. It's interesting. I mean, I think it would be, there might be a move in that time. There might be a move. Yeah, it's like, it's fun. It's exciting because I have these visions, of like my work, finding the people who desperately need to read it. That's something I would love to see. The people who are going to be like, oh, I feel so seen. I feel like this is helping me understand myself and find the resources that I need for whatever challenge I'm going through. That's the big thing that I would see in that time. I think I would still be here in Turkey as I continue to put more of that work out into the world. Then we might, who knows, we might pack up our cats and all my books and go back to the States for a while. I wrote one book that was like choose your own adventure. So you get every few pages, you get to make a decision of like, well, you get to choose like what trope the characters are going to play out, but you choose the setting even. Is it set in Michigan? Is it set in Izmir, Turkey, or in Dresden, Germany? And then at the end, there isn't one right answer. You know, it's like the characters, spoiler alert, they're together, but where will they be after the end of the page? Who knows? That's up to them because that part wasn't written. So yeah, similarly for me, I'm like, I might be here, I might be there. I might be in the multiverse, I've been both, you know? I'm going to be here and there at the same time. My alternate reality version of myself. So
you would leave an open end.
I think so. There's just so much, there's so much that I can't see.
To slowly come to an end. And I think that's also something you've mentioned already. What's your biggest advice to anyone who is in an intercultural relationship and or with moving abroad or living abroad already?
I think in both of those situations, which might come together, I think there's so much like looking within that needs to happen. Like it may slightly different ways, maybe in a relationship, it's having flexibility, like looking at yourself and having flexibility with the things that you think are fixed based on the way that you grew up and the worldview that you have from, you know, your culture, your family's culture. Just because it's yours doesn't mean it's right. You know, like everyone feels that way based on the things that are imprinted on us from a very young age, culturally, but also even just like, even if we're from the same culture, even if we're from the same family, we have differences that shape us at that time. So that flexibility, curiosity, I would say, like, I want to be curious about myself because there's still things I'm learning about myself. I'm 38 years old and like, I'm learning things about myself all the time. So yeah, going on a journey of discovery with your partner to find your compromise instead of like trying to convince them of something or beat them down until they submit to thinking your way. You know, it's like, let's be curious about this. Where did this come from? Like this thing that is a difference between us that we don't see in the same way. We're like, well, why is that? Okay, let's figure it out together. And then similarly, moving abroad, looking within in terms of finding the resources inside yourself for the challenges that come up. Because there's always going to be external resources and people and things like that. But like the internal resources, the strength, the resilience, the being your own best friend. Like, I don't know, the more I live, the more I'm like, oh, have all the answers been within me this whole time? You know, and I was just looking everywhere else for them. But I think curiosity, compassion, flexibility, these are all like values that I find important in moves and love, I guess.
For everyone who wants to connect with you, who wants to learn more about you, about your work, about who you are, has some questions, maybe. What's the best way to connect with you?
I just started a brand new Instagram, so it's a great way to connect with me. I'll definitely see you there because I just started it, so it's a big fat 0 followers. But it's just like my name, author Casey McCormick Çiftçi. So I can link that, I guess, probably, because Çiftçi is not the easiest name for most non-Turkish speakers to spell. And then my website is also the same, caseymccormick.com. And my books are everywhere.
Is there anything else you would like to share with us?
I think we've covered it all. You ask great questions, so I think there's been no stones left unturned, as the saying goes.
Well then, thank you so much for your time, Casey, and for giving us some insight into the work of a writer, to your mind, into your point of views, especially when it comes to life in general. I really enjoyed talking to you. And as always, I'm going to link everything in the side notes as well as in the YouTube video description. So for everyone who wants to contact you, you know where to find Casey. So definitely check it out. And yeah, have a great evening. Take care. And I hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you. It was so fun. I loved it.
Thank you so much for listening and or for watching to today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, feel free to subscribe on YouTube in case you're watching on YouTube, and to give the podcast a review, leave 5 stars. If you do have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me. I will link all my contact details in the side note and in the description of the video. And if you would like to tell your love story as well and hang out with me and have a little chat about how you met, what you struggled with, where you at the moment, and about your future plans, do not hesitate to contact me as well. You will find a form in the description and in the side notes. Feel free to use it and I'll get back to you. With this being said, have a lovely morning, have a lovely afternoon, have a lovely evening wherever you are right now, and take care. Bye.